Welcome to the SAIS Virtual Book Club. Today we're talking with Jason Ramsden of Ravenscroft School in North Carolina about his book, Communicating and Connecting with Social Media. As always, our facilitator today is Jamie Baker from Reverb Consulting. Let's join the conversation already in progress.
Is social media now, so ubiquitous that we should just think of it as one of the tools in the toolbox?
It absolutely, and hopefully folks can see my screen now. But I totally believe that's the case, that social media is just another form of media. And actually schools have been doing social media really well for a long time, even before there was technology, because we're social by nature, working in education, and schools are social by nature when you have families and children attending them. So when we start talking a little bit about social media in schools, I think we just need to drop the social altogether. It's just another avenue of media. So I don't know about the rest of you all, but it's afternoon, so sometimes snacks go hand in hand, and so I'm going to throw some donuts up there for you. I know Angela will like this slide. She sent out this picture earlier today, and I actually happened to see it floating through my social media streams earlier. And I think it's a good kickoff because I think folks tend to think about social media just like this. So if you kind of run down the list, Twitter, I'm eating a donut. Facebook, I like them. Foursquare, hey, this is where I get my donuts. Instagram, hey, I took a cool picture of a donut. YouTube, you can watch me eat one. LinkedIn, I've got good donut skills. Pinterest, here's a recipe. Last.fm, I like to listen to donuts. And then Google+, I work at Google and I eat donuts. And I think people tend to think about social media in those categories. And to a certain extent, I think it plays out pretty well, and that's kind of true, but you can also take it to a whole different level where that's not really what it's all about. So I offer that just kind of as a little bit of humor to get us started here this afternoon, because I don't know about you, but my stomach is rumbling a little bit, and those chocolate glazed donuts look pretty good to me. So the first question, and for those of you who have seen the 5 questions with me that SAIS put out, who's in charge of social media is the first one. And I think it's a fantastic question, especially when you're working in a school environment, to talk about where does it live and who owns it. If you're looking at the business side of things, if you're looking at corporations, I had the good fortune to attend Internet Summit 2011 right here in Raleigh, North Carolina. We're pretty fortunate to have a group that runs an Internet Summit. So I got to actually listen to a lot of folks who are in the social media space talk about this. But when they were talking about it, they said in businesses, typically about 81% of folks house it in their marketing department, 62% in their digital department. It'd be nice here in our small independent schools if we actually had folks who were committed to total digital, but that's just not the case. Public relations, 48%, and customer service, 26%. So I'm going to throw it out there as a question: who is in charge of social media? And I'd love to get, at least initially, some feedback from Angela, if she can pop on the line to let me know what her thoughts are as a communications director working for SAIS.
Thank you, Jason, for the shout out. I appreciate that. I love the donuts picture. I'm now trying not to Google some recipes my own self in a different window. I think for us at SAIS, when I came on board as the communications manager, we really hadn't started a social media strategy, which I thought was really quite interesting, that the organization took sort of a slower approach. That, when social media came online, it seemed like everybody thought, well, there is Facebook, so we have to do Facebook, and there was this sort of scattershot approach, and SAIS didn't do that. So we had some time to kind of create a strategy before we put our toes into the water. So my position was created as communications manager, so it has always belonged to me or to this department as communications. I know in some instances social media lives with development. I know in some of our schools it lives with student life or student services, and in others it lives with communications. In the instance of Georgia Tech, there's, I counted just the other day, and I know that it's a university, but there are 168 official Twitter presences that belong to Georgia Tech on Twitters, everything from athletics to different colleges and departments. So there's 168 different official Georgia Tech Twitter feeds for whatever interest, and so it seems to live with everybody in that regard.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. Universities obviously have a lot more people, and so it may live everywhere. But it's an incredibly important point about who's actually in charge of social media at our schools. I know very well. Well, if I'm looking at the stats of people on this call, about 2/3 of the folks are actually involved in communications directly, which tells me, independent schools, have kind of taken that charge and have started communications departments. Probably most of them are a subset of the development or advancement offices. Some may be totally unto themselves, but I think that's kind of where social media lives in independent schools is within directors of communications offices or elsewhere, usually as a subset of an advancement. But I bring up the question because depending on the size of your school, you can definitely, I guess, take a look at how you farm it out. So if you're a single person who is trying to do social media amongst all other things, you may be a shop of one, or somebody at your school said, hey, you know what, you were born in the last 25 years, guess what, you're in charge of social media, that you may need to farm it out to other folks at the school. So for me, I see a lot of it being coming out of the communications office, and I think for our schools, for the independent schools, I think that's actually a pretty good place for it to live. That's not to say that admissions and marketing or alumni can't also work in social media spaces, but I think you definitely need to have somebody who's ultimately charged with kind of the path of social media and who's going to do what, where, when, and why.
So Jason, when you say in charge of, can you talk about the sort of aspect of controlling social media and also the aspect of designing the purposes of social media, and then also the aspect of, standards, like if we're, the blurry line between, is it my Twitter feed or do I represent the school, some of those things?
Yeah, I think any school that's going into it, it really needs to kind of brand themselves. And I know schools aren't really big on the word branding, but we are. We're a brand. People in our communities know our name, and they associate certain things with our school names. Some are positive, and obviously some are negative. That just happens to be part of working in marketing in our schools. And so in terms of control and that fine line, if you, for instance, I'm Raven Tech, and so I tweet from my experience more than anything else in terms of working in social media spaces and talking about things that are social media related and ed tech related. And just because Ravenscroft and we're the Ravens, I happen to put Raven in there. But it's more as me as an individual and not necessarily coming from my position per se. It's kind of a blend. But if you're working directly for a communications department of a institution, then you're definitely tweeting as that institution and posting things on Facebook or LinkedIn as the person responsible for that in your school. So I think that's a little bit of who's in charge and how does that fit. I don't necessarily see it as much of a fine line between personal and professional if you are doing it on behalf of the school. Spreading the word as an individual, definitely. You want folks on board at your school, so you may have teachers who are tweeting, and you want to involve them in getting the word out, because the larger the circles go, the more people know about what's going on. So For instance, my account, my Raventech account, automatically retweets anything that Ravenscroft puts out. So I don't actually have to think about doing it, and it does it at timed intervals. So it looks like there's this approach to getting the word out a little bit more than what you might normally see.
So who's in charge of social media at your school? Is that you, Jason?
No.
Obviously, if you wrote the book.
No. To bring up the book is a good point, but I'm not in charge of social media here. Actually, our director of communications is in charge of social media, her and her team, and she pulls in certain folks from, for instance, the alumni office to work their alumni Facebook page and those sort of things. So that's where it lives here. I just happen to be kind of heavily invested in it as an interest. Sure, I wrote a book on it, but my part of the book was more about developing policies around social media and kind of talking about the future of social media in schools. The book that I did write, Communicating and Connecting with Social Media, I had a principal as one of my co-authors and also a teacher. And so we looked at it from, and the book was written actually specifically for public school folks because it was sponsored by the National Elementary School Principals Association. But we were focused on a public school environment where they don't have communications offices. They have a principal who just wants to say, you know what, we've got a lot of good things going on here, and I want the media to know a lot about the good things that are happening in my school. And then we also had a teacher who was focused on more the personal learning network side of things. So that's a component of the book as well. I won't touch on that today because most of the folks in this session, about 2/3 of the folks are communications folks, and the rest are either in admissions advancement or technology. So we can talk about it if folks want, but I think we need to focus on the marketing and admissions and communicating and alumni side of things. So
maybe you could talk about a little bit of what a strategic approach to social media looks like.
Sure. So the question is, do you need a strategic social media plan? And I think that's a fantastic question. Angela asked that of me when we did the 5 questions for SAIS, and I thought, you know what, it's not about having a strategic social media plan. It's really having a strategic communication and marketing plan. And I would think that most people on this call would say, you know what, we need one of those if we don't have it. We just finished a communications audit here back in the fall where we were actually lauded pretty well for having a good handle on social media. But if we didn't, the person who did the audit was definitely going to say, you know, you need to include this in your overarching communication plan. So forget, again, you know, do you need a strategic social media plan? Absolutely, but it needs to be part of your overall communication and marketing plan. And then who develops that and where does that live, again, depends on the size and makeup of your school. But based upon the folks in this meeting, in this webinar, I would say that's going to live smack in the communications office. One of the other questions that came up is how do we measure the value of social media in our schools, in and around our schools? How does that work? And I always tie that to kind of what you see on the screen there: prospects, academics, alumni, donors, and athletics. Are we talking about the things that are happening in our schools? Are we telling our story? That's a big piece about social media, because I can guarantee you if you're not telling your story, somebody else will be. And so you definitely want to be telling it and talking about all the good things that are happening in your schools and sharing. And that can be on Twitter, it can be on Facebook, it can be through blogging. That's another form of social media because it can be a two-way communication. It helps you be a little bit more transparent. So one of the things, if you want to, anybody says, well, how do you measure if this thing is really working? You kind of have to get a handle on your analytics. People don't typically talk about that when you talk about social media. And actually, when I went to the Internet Summit here back in the fall, that was a big portion. Businesses obviously are trying to figure out how that ties to revenue. That's not the case for us in independent schools, but you still want to have a good idea of, okay, if I'm tweeting something out, how often is it being retweeted? Or if I'm posting on Facebook, are people liking and commenting on the posts that I put on? And there's certain tools that you can use to do that. I won't dive too much into that today, but there's some really good tools that you can use to measure the value of your social media, but also you just look for examples. St. Christopher's School in Richmond had posted basically a clip of the championship football game, and they had won, and they had tweeted it out, and they put some hashtags on it, I believe, and actually ESPN found it and put it on their ESPN high school page. So all of a sudden you have somebody who's shot some video of their football championship game, not thinking that it's going to go very far, and the next thing you know, it's getting picked up and played on ESPN high school. So that's a great measure. Obviously, it's a good example of how you measure social media in your school environment, but it's about connections, I think, more than anything else.
So what are some of the ideas like that, Jason, of things that you can tweet? I think one of the areas that is so important is opportunities to tell the story of the learning that's going on in your environment. So one classroom teacher can be quite effective, don't you think, in sharing projects that her class is working on, or outings that the class has had, or big questions that the class is undertaking to investigate. I mean, do you think social media is an effective way to create sort of windows to the classroom and the type of learning that a school is, espousing?
Absolutely. I think in anybody who's in a school environment who's in charge of social media needs to have a pretty good handle on the faculty who are tweeting as well, and really encourage them to, whenever they are tweeting about their school, to include the @ symbol for the school. Because a good example of that is anything that I'm doing. We just rolled out Chromebooks here at Ravenscroft, and anytime I have something that I'm tweeting out, a picture or something like that, I'll say here, and then at Ravenscroft and see we are doing X, Y, and Z. So what happens is the person who's monitoring social media for the school, which happens Penny Rogers, our Director of Communications, when she gets on to take a look at that, she sees that I've actually used the school's name in a tweet, and she'll retweet it. So that's a way to have a concerted effort. If you have multiple people tweeting about what's going on in your school, that you don't have to say, oh, you know what, I did this today, or I'm thinking about doing this via email or anything like that. If you use the school's username in your tweets, it automatically gets picked up by who's ever in charge, and they can retweet it, or they can take it and post it on Facebook, or even LinkedIn, depending on the topic of the information that's happening. But I think if you leverage your teachers who have learned about Twitter from the folks at your school, have learned about what a PLN is and how to share properly, then I think it can actually stretch the value of social media for you.
So have you guys at Ravenscroft had sort of workshops or meeting about, this is a good thing to share on, Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter, and this is not such a good thing, and what the difference is in order to help people sort of get a hang of, you can't just say, we're a great school, in every tweet. I mean, to help the quality of the sharing become, I guess, more strategic and higher quality?
Sure. We offer a week-long series of workshops every summer called Infusing Innovation, and one of the things that I teach in that week-long workshop, and we offer a lot of different sessions, but one of the ones I focus on is personal learning networks. And I think if you can get teachers interested in developing a personal learning network and give them an idea, okay, well, it's important to connect with other teachers outside of your school because of the things that you learn, part of that session is, okay, well, this is how we share and why we share, and how we kind of help move things forward. And it takes some folks a couple of times. I've had a few folks come back a couple of times before they actually got rolling with Twitter and using it for their personal learning networks. But once they did, they saw the power of it. And then as they tweet about things happening at school, it kind of gets caught up in our feeds, and then the school can retweet it if they found that they're talking about a school session or something going on in the classrooms. So I think it's definitely something that you need to consider when you're talking about bringing teachers on board. It's almost an army of social media folks if you play your cards right.
Yeah, the power of many versus the power of one.
So we talked about this slide a little bit already. What does the value of social media bring to my school? And it's really the ability to control your story and message in a space where we've talked about it before. If you're not telling your story, somebody else probably will be, and that's what it comes down to. But you have to be careful too about sharing your story and controlling it. People sometimes will get wrapped up in, I'm one of one, I'm going to take this one story and I'm going to put it on Twitter and I'm going to put it on Facebook and I'm going to put it on LinkedIn and a couple other places, and all of a sudden people who are your constituents, who are living in those spaces, see that same message multiple times. And I think that's a real important takeaway for folks, is that the value of your social media goes down the more that you cross-post, and that's just my opinion. But you have to think, okay, who's on Twitter? Are my parents on Twitter, or is it mostly kids at school who are following us looking for athletic updates? Are most of my parents an alum on Facebook? Most of our alums are on LinkedIn. So you really have to, it goes back to that strategic planning, you really have to craft your message for each of the different buckets. Because if you're putting the same thing out to every single place, sooner or later your messages kind of get lost and people will tune you out. So make sure when you're controlling your story and your messaging, you're doing it in a way that you're targeting the right markets in with the right tool.
So as part of what you're saying, Jason, is that there's really a culture of authenticity, if you can go that far, to social media, and people can see through that sort of scatter approach?
Oh, absolutely. I think that if you're not being authentic and transparent in how you do your social media, then you probably shouldn't be doing it to begin with, because you're not understanding the concept of what social media is about. But I understand why people fall into that trap of cross-posting. It becomes time. We talk a little bit about that. When do you share, and how do you share, and what do you share? Think about that for a moment. If you, as a school of one person, or a department of one who's charged with doing social media, and you think, all right, in the course of my day, I can do that at lunchtime every day. Well, how do you know that the people you're tweeting to or posting to Facebook are actually on at that time of day? That's where you go back to the metrics of saying, okay, what kind of tools can I use to say, you know what, I know that most people are probably looking at their Facebook account first thing in the morning, or after dinner at night. Twitter may be a little bit more of an ebb and flow than that. So I look to try and tweet things out on a schedule, or post them to Facebook on a schedule. So that's when you start to talk about tools like Hootsuite and some other things that can really help you focus when and how you put out your social media. Also bring some value to your school, because you really don't want to cross that line where folks don't see you as being authentic.
So it's not really on your list as far as, because it's not really a push-out sort of form of media, but I know that you personally value especially Twitter as a personal learning tool, and that brings a lot of value to your school. And do you think that's really measurable? And can you just talk about Twitter as a tool for a personal learning network for a minute?
Well, there's no question that people are social by nature. They want to connect, and they want to know, they want to learn from other folks. Because it's a lot easier to ask a question to multiple folks and get an answer, or to ponder a question with multiple people, than it is with one or two folks. So purely from a personal learning network standpoint, Twitter is the most valuable tool I think I have. It took a lot of time to build that garden, and I call it a garden because if anybody who gardens out there, and this is true whether you're doing it as a personal account or you're doing it as part of your school, if you are getting onto Twitter and trying to grow it, there is a lot of time and energy that goes into developing a following, learning how the system works, cleaning out the weeds, those spam Twitter accounts that always come up, cleaning out the weeds. But once you get your garden grown, and year after year you can add to it and make it a stronger garden, you don't have to participate as much. I have big ebb and flows now when I'm on Twitter, but whenever I do get on, I find lots of great information. And when I'm on and I share, I find people are able to retweet and provide back in the conversations that I'm involved in, because I've taken the time to kind of build that up. And the same holds true for institutions as well.
So talking about your garden, getting started takes a lot of time, and it just frankly feels really awkward when you first start. I mean, you don't really know, it, first of all, there's the logistics of learning what to do, and then it's like what to say. So, how do you get over that awkwardness?
Right, and that kind of ties into the next slide that I have, Jamie. It's kind of what happens if we get social media wrong. Lots of people are afraid about entering the space, and I think most of the people on this call are, I would imagine, already there or considering it for their schools. And you know what? It's just like any other social interaction. There can be some awkward times when you're working in social media, and people do really see that as, well, that's the wrong, that could go wrong, and that's going to reflect poorly on my school. But I always kind of counter that with, what if you get it right? What if you get social media right? What does that mean for your institution? What does that mean when news and media in your local area are picking up stories because you've gotten your social media right and they're telling the right stories, the good things that are happening at school, the good things that are happening with your teachers, the awards that are happening at your school, things that are coming in. Then all of a sudden you're telling your story, and it's a good thing. But it's hard to get started. There's no question. I mean, I think I've been on Twitter since 2008. Actually, I told that to a couple of kids who were at my house the other day, and they're like, 2008? They couldn't believe that, an adult had been on Twitter for, twice as long as they had. But it took me 2 or 3 times to get going with it. And the same might be true for institutions trying to get started with Twitter or other social media products. It just takes a little bit of time to figure out what works and what doesn't work. But don't worry that you're going to get it wrong. If you're going to, just like any other thing in our schools, if you get it wrong, somebody's going to tell you. But usually it's not as bad as you think, and it's usually not as many folks who think it's wrong as you might initially imagine.
So is now a good time to sort of take some questions, do you think?
Absolutely.
I don't
We
know
have
if
about 20 minutes left, so.
Muted or not, or
Yeah, if you have a question, I think the best thing to do is to maybe put a quick note in the chat box, and then we'll kind of take those questions. You can come off mute with your *6.
You there?
yeah.
Yep.
Hi,
Yes.
it's Aurelia Monk at the Oakwood School.
Hi, Aurelia.
You were mentioning Hootsuite.
Yes.
Is this an appropriate time to talk about that?
Absolutely.
Tell me more.
Okay. So Hootsuite is a tool that you can use, and I'll actually bring it up on the screen so you guys can see it. I like it because it's web-based. I don't have to install it. I can use it on pretty much any device, and it all syncs together. And there's a free version and a paid version. We do a paid version here because it allows you to do a few more things. And it may take a second for it to pop up here. But I like it because I can monitor conversations. I can see hashtags. I can see things that are going on at school. I can have different columns and tabs. It really allows me to monitor at a glance, really, lots of different things that are going on with social media and are in around things of interest to me, and then also things that are happening at school. So it's taken a second to pop up here, but you can see kind of this is my main board. And the home feed over here is everybody that I follow on Twitter. I can tell you right now I don't look at this as often as I do people I've marked as kind of my fave tweets. Those are people who I kind of listen to for certain topics. I can see when people talk about me. And then as I go across, you can kind of see I'm following the Independent School Ed Chat and Indie School. Those are 2 hashtags that it just kind of takes all the conversations and draws them into certain columns. Again, the conference is coming up, the National Association of Independent Schools Annual Conference. Started to follow that. When it's over, I can get rid of this column. Chromebooks, because we're talking about Chromebooks. You can see I actually tweeted today about it. People who retweeted it for me. Ed Tech and Chat, Leadership Chat. Then I can also flip over here and see who's talking about Ravenscroft. I can look at social media as a topic, any vendors that I follow. And there's actually, Ravenscroft is a big surname in England, so we get a lot of extra stuff in there that makes no sense to us, so we got to cull through a little bit more. But social media topics, vendors that I like to figure out what's going on with all the different vendors that I use and others that I may be considering using. I think vendors sometimes forget that people are watching. So it's just a great tool overall to kind of segment and put together your social media presence and monitor it. It also has the ability to schedule tweets, so you can schedule one-off, bulk, so you can kind of set it and forget it too if you have, you know what, Monday mornings are the day that I'm going to do all my tweets for the week, and I have my schedule, and I'm just going to put it out there and let it run, and then I kind of have to, don't worry about it until the next week. It's not a bad strategy for some folks who kind of are a little bit of a smaller shop and need to work on a schedule like that.
Check out your mentions column.
Yep, I see that. Thanks, Jamie. And so that's Hootsuite for you.
Other questions?
Other questions? Nope. So I do see one here about discussion boards in Facebook. Is anybody using it successfully? Basically, Facebook friends at that one school don't seem overly interested in doing this discussion board. And I think it's just, with the discussion boards in Facebook, I just think it's something that hasn't taken off for most folks. They're caught up in basically doing comments and likes. They don't really get the discussion board per se. And I would love to hear if there's any school out there on this call or elsewhere that actually is getting folks to do discussions on the discussion board. The reason I bring that up is that statistics say that a link that you put out, let's say you put a link on your wall page, on your wall, are twice as likely to get shared if somebody has commented on it, or get a like if someone's commented on it. So the discussions kind of feed right into that.
Sherry, are you guys using discussion board and having any sort of luck or learning anything interesting along the way? No luck, so you gave up.
It happens. Sometimes it takes time. We were talking about it before. Sometimes it takes time to grow the garden, and it definitely takes time, to develop your brand as a social media part of branding your school. And again, I know people don't like that term, but it really is who we are as institutions. Because I guarantee if you walk around your town and ask them, there's three things are going to happen. If you say, you know what, I work at Ravenscroft, so I'm either going to get a positive response, a negative response, or kind of a lukewarm response, or and that's the one I'm probably more concerned about, is not the negative response, but the what's Ravenscroft's response. That tells me that we're not as big. But that happens anywhere. Those are the three things that happen to your brand and your markets. And obviously want them to be more on the positive side, but all three are going to happen regardless. So social media is definitely your brand when we're talking about communicating and connecting. Somebody asked before, and Jamie brought this up, about sharing, teachers sharing, and how does that happen. And this is a great slide. I love this. I kind of put this together from some information I got at the conference last year. So what really is shareable? So think about the things that people share in general. So that's purely on the personal side. So if you go down your Facebook feed and you're trying to figure out what people share, it's things that they're interested in. They are sharing things about their kids. They're sharing things about brands they're interested in. And then you flip it to the other side and you think, okay, now I have my school on this side. And when those two merge, things people share and your school, those are the shareable moments at your school. And that directly correlates to the social media cycle. And this is what social media breaks down to in basically 4 steps. People see things, they click on them, then they need, that's the biggest piece, is they need to have a desire to share them, and if they do, they share, and the cycle continues. If you get stuck on any of these 4 points, then your social media endeavors kind of get stuck along the way as well. So it's a great slide. I love to show this one because it's pretty simple. See, click, desire to share, share. That kind of breaks social media down real quickly for folks.
So when you think about what to share, there is sort of a sizzle factor as an interest factor. I mean, would this be interesting for someone else to share?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good point. And one of the things you have to keep in mind, another thing I learned from that conference, which I love to tell people about, is pictures. People know that pictures say 1,000 words, but I bet you didn't know that pictures actually entice people to click links more than they would just text, which I thought was a very interesting stat to find out. And you have to obviously be careful with your pictures, but if you're doing any sort of social media where you're not including pictures of events or not including things where people need to see what's going on, then you're kind of losing an opportunity, I think, to have people engage with you.
So how are you involving students in the conversation that's happening about your school, Jason?
At the moment, we are basically doing it through our broadcast journalism class in our upper school. There are a couple things that we're doing. You may have seen it back here on my dashboard when I go to Ravenscroft. And we're between semesters, so I don't think the new class is tweeting just yet, but they may be February 3rd. The Nevermore here is our student newspaper, and then we have an online journalism class that takes it and puts it online in blog format, and they have the ability to tweet on behalf of the school. And so you'll see Nevermore Life, that's life and times around school, Nevermore News, and Nevermore Sports. Those are the 3 categories that we have the kids. And we did this on purpose so that it always had the school newspaper in front. And so they do some interesting things. They've been doing a Dance of the Week, which they broadcast on our YouTube channel. But they also do other things about the blood drive and some other things, doing polls. So that's how we have the kids kind of getting involved with learning about the proper ways to use social media. I can't say that it always translates over to their personal Twitter accounts, but it at least gets them thinking about what to share and what not to share.
Are you noticing more students in the Twitter space, do you think?
Absolutely. I would say in our high school we have 445 students, and I would say that it's taken off probably in the last year and a half. I don't know. I wouldn't want to venture exact numbers, but I would say in our junior and senior class we probably have probably half the folks on Twitter based upon just side conversations with a few of the kids that I know. But I think it's burgeoning, and they like it because they can actually reach more people than they could in Facebook. But they're also finding out pretty quickly that most of them want to keep it private, so they lock down their accounts as well. So we have conversations with them about what does that mean when you put something out in a private account and someone you know doesn't have their tweets locked down and they retweet it. It's out there as quick as can be. So it's conversations we have to have. We do actually do some training with our athletes, more than the general population, but with our student athletes we tend to have conversations with them at the start of sports seasons, particularly our varsity teams, because a lot of them have colleges looking at them, and then depending on the season and the team, we also have some news media that will follow our students. So we try to remind them that it's not as quiet or private as they may think.
Right. So there's a good comment in the chat from Sherry about the reproducibles in your book. So you're kind of shy about talking about your book, but do talk about some of the things that are able to be reproduced and shared from your book that can help with social media policy and also to develop learning and develop a social strategic sort of approach to using social media.
Sure. Yeah, that's one of the great things about working with Solution Tree, who is the publisher for our book. They do reproducibles for pretty much everything that they do, and so you can actually get them online I'll throw up a link a little bit later. Let's see, actually I might even be able to throw it up right now. Nothing like typing in front of an audience. So you can see actually all of there. Just got to scroll down to mine. And so you can go right here and go to go.solution-tree.com/technology and find our book. And then you can have a table of nice reproducibles that you can pull out of the book. And that actually are things in there like media release for parents. Now, that was specifically crafted for folks who are in public schools, but one of the things that we did was include it right in our re-enrollment contract. So that's something that you want to consider. And when we talked about it in our re-enrollment contract, we broke it down into basically we didn't mention social media. We just said media and advertising and talked about all different forms that can take and just put it right in the enrollment agreement at the bottom. And folks need to opt out of it. And I think last year, this current school year, I think we had one pre-K family who opt out of their child being involved in any sort of media efforts, but most folks don't. But some of the other reproducibles are in here are things like questions to consider if you're getting involved in social media space. So if folks out there haven't started in social media just yet, you can actually talk about doing a school community. We offer a school communication survey. We talk about exploring school-based social media efforts, and there's things that you can measure along the way. And there's lots of great references of schools that are doing it well in our book. So it's you don't have to buy the book, although we'd love it if you did. But you don't have to buy the book to get the reproducibles. So you can use them as a tool. They're there free for you to do that.
So Jason, do you think social media is supplanting other forms of media, or do you think it's just a good sort of companion tool? Or both, depending on the circumstance?
I think it is a tool in a communication director's toolbox, just like anything else. But I think over time it'll start to supplant some of more of the traditional forms of communication. It has a lot to do with the transparency and people wanting to share and tell the story. It's really hard for me to effectively, I say effectively, I can cut an ad out of a newspaper, but for me to reproduce that and send that to lots of people, that just doesn't make sense for me. It may for others, and I think people get stuck in the concept of, we've always done media this way, and we always are in this magazine or that magazine or this newspaper. And I think if you're not tracking that in terms of, all right, if we're doing an ad in the local newspaper, do we have that actually tagged in our admission software so that we know that X amount of people saw that and called us because of that ad? Or is it just being, being a presence out there? And I know some people say, oh, well, that's the chief technology officer. What does he know about marketing and communications? And yeah, I wrote a book about it, but I also used to be a director of admissions and public relations before I got involved in the tech side. So I do have a pretty good understanding about where communications are headed and how technology can help you there. I don't think it's going away anytime soon, the traditional forms of media. But, as schools, if we're not evolving, which I hope we would be, then I worry a little bit.
So we've got about 5 minutes left. Yeah, go ahead.
It's Aurelia again. This is a little bit off topic, but I'm curious, while I understand this seminar is more about understanding social media and using that as a tool, but how about using the tool for more media? In other words, I am paying to advertise on Facebook right now. Do you think that's worthwhile?
That's a great question. We have done that in the past, and what we did this year to try and track that better is the month before we released our summer programs catalog online. So basically in the middle of June to just this last week, we did a month-long of advertisements on Facebook that people could click, and they would go to a page that talked a little bit about our social, or a little bit about our summer programs, and they could fill out a form for more information so that they would get an email alert when everything went live. The last time I checked, I don't think a single person filled out the form. So, and we had plenty of people click on it. I want to say over the course of that 4 weeks, we maybe had 50, something along those lines, 50 people click on the ad that went directly to that page, the landing page with a form in it. And so, part of me says, okay, well, they didn't fill out the form to get advance notice, but they also came to our site and saw that we actually had summer programs and that we would be opening it up, and maybe they would come back again. So I think it's one of those things where if you can get people to fill out a form, it helps with your metrics. You say, you know what, 25 people clicked on this Facebook ad, they went to this landing page, and half of those people filled out the form. That would be awesome. That didn't ring true for us because nobody really filled out the form to ask for more information. But we don't know what the true measure of that is other than we had 50 people click on that ad. So I'm not quite ready to give up on that just yet. And I just wonder if people just don't fill out more information cards because they realize, it's on the web, I can Google it at any time and get back to it if I need to. The other thing I would say about Facebook ads, I don't know how you guys are running them, but whenever we do ads, we do 3 different kinds and play with the metrics of who can see it and the pictures that you use. So sometimes, for instance, with the summer camps one, I used 3 different pictures. One was a picture of a couple of lower school girls who are at camp. One was a picture of boys playing baseball, and then another one was was a young man playing chess. And then I targeted those pretty much to anybody in a 50-mile radius, except for the one in the girls. I sent that just to women because I wanted to know if there was a different kind of trend there. And oddly enough, the picture of the boy playing chess, well surpassed any of the other ads. So I thought that was kind of interesting to see, all right, well, what are people interested in from our summer programs? Sounds like enrichment more than anything else. You can kind of do some rough analysis of that based upon the click-throughs on the ads.
It could be also sort of differentiation. You guys may be one of the only camps offering sort of a mix of academic and fun sort of stuff,
True,
and
true.
That was captured by the picture. Thanks for your good work, Jason. Thanks for the book and all the things that it has to offer, and for taking your time this afternoon to share. Jason is available at, what is it, J. Ramsden at ravenscroft.org.
Oh, sure.
Is that right?
Yeah, hold on one second. I'll flip to that very last slide.
There you go.
There it is.
Is a really good way to get in touch with Jason, and he's got a lot of different blogs or bloggings of sessions, almost an addictive sharer, I would say, Jason. So thanks for the time.
You're most welcome. I really appreciate you all having me on.
I will mention that our last session for the year is on March 27th, and we will be hosting Tom Herr, who has been the head of New City School in St. Louis for over 25 years. He's the author of 2 books, The Art of School Leadership and Leading for the Future, and we will be discussing aspects of school leadership.
Thanks, everybody. There will be a survey that goes out probably early tomorrow morning with some links as well. We'll send a follow-up email with a lot of these links to the books and other resources from Jason, but we'll also put a survey in there. If you could just fill it out, it lets us know what you're interested in and how we're doing on the service that we provide to our membership.